This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about the coming 2020 election catastrophe and what it means for the stock market. If you want to understand how the economy actually works so you can make money in both bull or bear markets, or you just want to see what I'm trading or investing in, be sure to hit that subscribe button. So I previously made a video about the presidential election 2020 in the U.S., saying that I thought it would be a relatively smooth transition of power. And I was trying to counteract these rumors that Trump would refuse to leave and become a dictator. People said something similar about that Obama was not going to leave the White House. So I didn't think this was true. But I put some more thought into this, and I think I've come up with a scenario that is actually likely that could cause a big problem and a lot of volatility in the markets. Now, I should say that if you watch my previous video, you know I'm not a big two-party politics guy. I believe much more in the local, and I believe that the real president of the United States is Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve. That's where the real power is. So this is not going to be a pro-Biden, pro-Trump. I think low two-party politics is really the lowest form of politics. But I am interested. The election has a lot of event risk, and so I'm very interested here in its impact or possible impact on the stock market. If we look at the prediction markets, Joe Biden has a 58% chance of winning. Trump has a 45% chance of winning. We saw similar numbers going into the 2016 election. And so this is a financial prediction market, but it can get it wrong. And it may turn out that the election is actually much closer than the prediction markets are saying. And this is what's suggested by the VIX and the VIX futures. Currently, the VIX is at roughly 26, and we see this huge event risk going out into really the first 5 months of next year, peaking at the November futures. This is where the volatility, basically this is the futures market saying where they think the VIX is going to be. The VIX is a measure of fear in the stock market. But what's interesting is even in December and in January, the market, some of this is obviously COVID, but even in January, December, and February, the market is still pricing in much higher volatility. So I think I've come up with a couple scenarios here that could create a lot of uncertainty and a stock market sell-off. So here's one scenario that I've heard floating around, and this is the basic idea that on the margins, more Republicans will vote in person. They'll be less afraid of COVID. More Democrats will vote by mail-in ballot because they'll be on the margins more afraid of COVID. Again, don't leave a comment saying that you're a Democrat and you're going to vote in person or whatever. This is just, these are sort of generalizations that and stereotypes. And of course, there are going to be exceptions to this, but I think this might be generally true. So this could lead to a scenario where obviously the in-person votes get counted more quickly, where Trump appears to be winning by a landslide on election night. And then what happens in the coming days and weeks, the mail-in votes, which were postmarked in time but took a while to trickle in and get counted, those lean overwhelmingly pro-Biden, and so Biden ends up actually winning. And this would have the effect of creating the maximum amount of rage on both sides of the aisle. Democrats mad about Trump's apparent re-election on election night, and then Republicans mad about the reversal of Trump's apparent victory. And you can see allegations of fraud being slung back and forth on both sides. So this is one scenario, but I think there's an even worse scenario that occurs with mail-in ballots. I've been trying to think a lot more about that. And having lived through the Bush versus Gore controversy in 2000, for those of you who were too young or weren't following politics back then, I believe the election was on November 7th that year. And we didn't know who was president until December 12th. So it took over a month. And this was basically a controversy about one county in Florida. And at first it looked like Gore was going to win. And then they did these various recounts, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And as we all know, Bush did win. At the heart of the controversy was a lot of ballots that were ambiguous. There was this problem of hanging chads where, I don't think I have a picture of it, but basically, down here, these were actually in-person votes where you kind of punched the card when you vote, and there was the little piece of paper. There was some debate whether it was hanging or whether so it was ambiguous who someone had voted for, and so this created this whole recount nightmare. And this was mostly in-person votes, partially punch chads or hanging chads. And so I think mail-in ballots, there's the fact that there can be much higher volume than the system is used to, and the fact that also there can be they can be ambiguous. People can have smeared ink on it. Maybe people signed it, or they signed the wrong signature. Maybe someone signed it for their spouse, or maybe someone received an absentee ballot in 2 different states. And so this could create a bunch of problems. So what I've done is I've gone back and looked at the 20th Amendment, which is really one of the relevant amendments to this. And basically, this says that the term of the president and vice president shall end at noon on the 20th day of January, and likewise for the senators and representatives on the 3rd day of January. So what this means is that if Trump loses, he needs to leave by noon on January 20th. Even if he doesn't lose, even if it's ambiguous, he still needs to leave the White House by noon on January 20th. And I don't think he's going to stay. I don't think we have a dictator-like situation in this case. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. But it gets much worse than that. So Trump will definitely, even if Biden wins, clearly Trump will need to leave. If it's ambiguous who has won, Trump will still need to leave the White House, and his term will end at noon, at 12 noon Eastern time on January 20th. Now, what kind of problems could happen with mail-in ballots? We've already talked a little bit about this: illegible, ambiguous mail-in ballots, missing signatures, forged signatures where there's some debate about whether it's been forged, missing stamps, people who voted in 2 states, and then you have to decide which one counts. Maybe someone has just recently moved from one state to another, and they receive absentee ballots accidentally in both states. So you could see where this, if it's a close election, these sort of mail-in ballot issues could become very big, and then immediately it'll get taken to the courts. It'll get taken to the state courts and the district courts, the federal courts, and ultimately the Supreme Court. We saw again in Bush versus Gore that this took more than 30 days for just one county in Florida. And things were definitely less politically turbocharged back then. But it was still a big problem, and the stock market fell on the uncertainty. At that point, we were sort of on the cusp of a new bear market. It had already begun. But this is what could happen in 2020. If we read a little further in the 20th Amendment, basically, let's see, the Congress may by law provide for the case wherein neither a president-elect nor a vice president-elect shall have qualified. Now, this part of the 20th Amendment assumes that we know who the president-elect is, i.e. that we have a majority in the Electoral College by January 20th. If we don't have a majority, if Electoral College has not voted and we don't have a president-elect, then the 20th Amendment does not apply, and Congress does not have authority, at least under this amendment, to elect a temporary president. So we could have the situation where Trump needs to leave the White House on January 20th, but Congress does not have the authority to elect a temporary president. So we could have a period of days or even weeks where there's actually no president of the United States. This is one scenario. Now you can argue maybe the president is more of a figurehead. He doesn't do that much, but I think this would be a bit dangerous for the system, especially if you're a foreign power looking in. This might be a good time, or a terrorist or something. This might be a good time, at least on the surface of things, to do some sort of attack. So it would be very strange to have a country as big as the U.S. without a president. It would really be unprecedented. No pun intended. So then I went and looked at the Presidential Succession Act of 1947 to see if this gives us any clarity into what would happen in a case like this. And it basically says that if by failure to qualify, and by failure to qualify, I think they're talking more about, like, it turns out that someone's not a citizen, or they're not 40 years old, or something like that. If there's neither a president nor vice president to discharge the powers and duties of the office of president, then the Speaker of the House of Representatives shall act as president. Again, this is under the Presidential Succession Act of 1947. So if there's no president-elect, if there's no vice president-elect because it hasn't been decided, then the Speaker of the House resigns as Speaker of the House, becomes the acting president of the United States. If there's no Speaker of the House, it would be the President pro tem or President pro tempore of the Senate who becomes acting president of the United States until the election issues can be solved. So we could have a situation which would really infuriate Republicans where Nancy Pelosi, who's the current Speaker of the House, becomes the acting president for a matter of days or weeks. But then there's a worst case scenario. What if there's so many disputed races in the House and Senate because of all these mail-in ballots, maybe there are a bunch of close elections, that I think I said Congress meets in early January before the inauguration, before January, certainly before January 20th. And so you could have a situation where there are a number of open seats still in the House of Representatives and in the Senate because these incoming mail-in ballots have not been finally counted, or the issues have not been resolved in the courts. In which case, we could have a situation where there are not enough people to elect a new Speaker of the House or a new President pro tem of the Senate because there's so many disputed races that have not been closed. In this case, we won't even have a Speaker of the House or a President pro tem of the Senate. So there may be a situation where we don't have a president, a vice president, a speaker, or a president pro tem of the Senate. And so we have a complete mess here. We have a complete vacuum of power. This is the current president pro tem is Chuck Grassley. So Nancy Pelosi could become president. Chuck Grassley could become president if the House has enough people, or if the Senate has enough people to reconfirm him as president pro tem of the Senate, which would mean he could become acting president of the United States. And then it just goes down the list from there. It actually starts to go into the cabinet. And this would be a little strange because this would be the old cabinet. This would be the cabinet under Trump, who would then be leaving on January 20th. But assuming the old cabinet stayed in to sort of fill the vacuum of power until we had a new president, the line of succession, again, after the Speaker of the House, after the Senate President pro tem, we would have Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury. This is sort of the line of succession to the president. Now, the current Secretary of State is Mike Pompeo, so he would be next in line. And then after that, one of my least favorite people, Steve Mnuchin, we would basically have an investment banker running investment banker as acting president of the United States. And I think this would be sort of poetic justice, since it does seem that the investment bankers and the Federal Reserve, the central bank, have all this power. But this would be a very, very strange year. You could argue this would be good for the stock market, having an investment banker in there. I think this would just create a lot of chaos as people went down the list and tried to figure out who was acting president. And then we could have a real situation if there was some foreign attack on the U.S., for example, or some cyber attack, or some really important decision that didn't need to be made by the executive branch. You could have a real constitutional crisis until all these mail-in ballots were counted. So I think some of this is a reason why the VIX futures are as overpriced as they are, that there is a real probability of this. I can't attach what probability it is, but I think this could create just tremendous volatility in the stock market. You can imagine the riots and chaos that would be accompanied by some sort of uncertainty like this. That being said, ultimately, I think it will be an opportunity to buy the dip, simply because whoever becomes president next, and this is one reason I don't care that much about two-party politics, is that it really is the bankers and the Federal Reserve that are in charge. They control the money. They can print as much money as they want and prop up asset prices, prop up equity prices. And so if we do get a crash or a huge volatility, there could be a great buying opportunity in November, December, and possibly going into January. But I do think that this is a scenario, because of these mail-in ballots, I hadn't really thought that through as much as I should have, that there's a chance that there is not a smooth succession of power, and we enter a very, very volatile time here as the market goes up and down and oscillates as we get news trickling in about who's ahead in as they do the various mail-in ballot counts, and as they go through the process of disputing the various races in the courts, possibly leading all the way up to the Supreme Court. And having lived, as I said, having lived through Bush versus Gore in 2000, it really does create a ton of uncertainty. And in a much more politically charged time as we are now, you could see that this would definitely be a negative for the stock market, but ultimately a positive for long-term investors who want to buy the dip and hold on as a long-term investment. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell so you can be notified when I put out my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.